Peace in Ukraine hangs in the balance after a week of high-stakes diplomatic drama. At the centre of it all is the self-styled peacemaker president of the United States. We've seen Trump and Putin meet in Alaska. Then Ukrainian President Zelensky brought in the muscle with leaders from the UK, Italy, Germany, NATO and the EU joining him at the White House. That was Europe's chance to put their case for what ending the war should look like to the leader of the free world. But will Trump back his allies' united front on protecting Ukrainian land, or will he push Zelensky towards making concessions in the name of peace? Our correspondent Alex Barker has the story.
Squeezing in for a photo. There would have only been 2 people to snap, but Ukraine's president brought backup. 6 European leaders joined him for talks with President Trump. A show of unity in the wake of Trump's meeting with Russia's President Putin when the red carpet was rolled out for him in Alaska. Such a warm welcome got a cold reception in Ukraine. So the Washington group was also perhaps a bit of a charm offensive. Finnish President Alexander Stubb had previously bonded with Trump over golf. Italian leader Giorgia Meloni also has a good relationship with him. She was the only European head of state invited to his inauguration. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has been full of praise for the president, once calling him daddy in relation to breaking up fighting in the Middle East. And Keir Starmer represents the UK's special relationship with the US with a state visit planned next month. So it was all very friendly. A far cry from the last time these two met.
During the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
President Trump is at that point so committed to the idea of arriving at a peace settlement in Ukraine that he will go an extra mile to be nicer to people than otherwise he would have been. I think for the sake of getting things done, he held himself back, as it were, and decided to spare us the drama and the show that we had the last time around that Zelensky turned up in the Oval Office.
So what does getting things done look like? Well, perhaps the biggest cause for optimism is the possibility of another meeting, one where Zelensky and Putin actually sit across the table from one another. Then there is the potential for a NATO-esque alliance of countries which would promise to protect Ukraine from any future aggression by Russia.
The coalition of willing countries, that's 30 countries already working together on security guarantees, will now work with the US on those guarantees, coordinating, and we have already commissioned our teams to do the detailed further work on that. That's really important for security in Ukraine, for security in Europe and for security in the United Kingdom.
But just how much security this coalition could offer isn't clear, and the president has ruled out sending American troops to Ukraine. Throughout it all is also a level of distrust in Russia's leader.
You have an American president, European presidents, and a Ukrainian president all wanting peace. For my part, I have the greatest doubts about the reality of a desire for peace on the part of the Russian president, because as long as he thinks he can win through war, he will do so.
Keir Starmer says Trump has brought us closer to ending the war than ever before. But just how close remains to be seen.
Well, let's see what the impact of all these diplomatic efforts have had in Ukraine itself. Our correspondent, Ilyas Avgev, is in Kiev. Ilyas, welcome. So what has the mood been like in Ukraine since the Alaska talks?
Well, it's been quite an emotional roller coaster here in Ukraine since the Alaska summit. It was uneasy, worrisome, but at times positive. Many Ukrainians felt sidelined by the Alaska talks because Kiev wasn't directly represented at that table, so there was a sense of frustration that decisions about their future was being made elsewhere. But a meeting with Zelensky quickly followed, of course, with EU leaders present, and we saw a positive atmosphere in those meeting rooms, though Ukraine is wary of what compromises might be forced on them. So I would say the mood over here is more cautious.
Keir Starmer says we are closer to peace than ever before. Is that how it feels in Ukraine?
Well, I wouldn't say that's exactly how it feels here. On the ground in Kiev, people don't sense peace is just around the corner. Russian strikes continue, and people hear air raid sirens several times on a daily basis. So that hardly feels like peace is imminent. Many see the politicians' words as political optimism rather than a reflection of reality.
Did seeing all those European leaders going to Washington to support President Zelensky have a positive impact?
Well, yes, but it's complicated. On one hand, it reassured Ukrainians that their allies are still involved and willing to put pressure on Russia. On the other hand, people here want to know that their voices are shaping the outcome, not just the leaders of other countries. The impacts was both, of course, encouraging and frustrating at once, I would say.
Is land, the idea of giving up land for peace, something that Ukrainian politicians could support, and the people of Ukraine, could they support it?
Well, that idea remains unpopular here in Ukraine. Many see giving up land isn't, it's not seen as a path to peace, but as rewarding aggression. But some others also say we've had enough and it's time to cut the loss. So there's obviously not a clear consensus on the matter. I believe the upcoming talks between Putin and Zelensky will shape also people's ideas on that matter.
Looking ahead to the all-important idea of security guarantees, are there any security guarantees that could make the Ukrainian people feel safe from another onslaught from Russia?
Well, that's the big question. Ukrainians welcome the idea of long-term guarantees, but they also know that paper promises may not stop missiles. NATO-style protection is what many here want, but anything less feels inadequate. But at the same time, Russia attacked partly in the first place because of Ukraine's NATO aspirations, so it'll be hard to convince Russia to say okay to such guarantees. And that's also one big question here, though they feel a gratitude for the support they've seen from the Western countries.
Ilya Savja in Ukraine, thanks very much indeed for joining us here on Westminster Watch. Let's get into this in more detail now. I'm joined by former Russian KGB officer Alexander Vassiliev, former British Army General Sir Richard Barrons, and Ukrainian journalist Svitlana Morenets. Welcome. Lovely to have you on Westminster Watch. Let me kick off with you, Svitlana, if I may. What we saw in Washington, what we saw in Alaska, the presence of European leaders congregating to support President Zelensky and make their point. Do Ukrainian people feel that actually Europe has got your backs?
Well, if you talk about the meeting in Washington, Ukrainians are very grateful that so many European leaders assembled so fast after the disaster in Alaska, and they went to Washington to support Volodymyr Zelensky and Ukrainians. First, from repeating the scandal in the Oval Office that happened in February, and second, to ensure that Ukrainian position is heard in the Trump administration, and that Ukraine is supported, and Trump understands who is the real aggressor in the war and what should be done to bring peace to Ukraine.
Well, Alexander, that's interesting. That show of power with the European leaders all marching into the White House and influencing, it seems, President Trump. Will that make President Putin stop and think?
No, I don't think that there was a show of power. Look, I don't think that if Secretary General, NATO Secretary General calls Donald Trump daddy, they're not regarded as serious politicians in Russia. They're very weak. It's well known that all of them are not extremely popular in their own countries, especially Keir Starmer. It was probably useful for Ukraine, but it didn't impress Russians at all.
Sir Richard, the truth is, whatever President Putin may think of the leaders, as Alexander's been talking about, The promise from France, the promise from Britain particularly, and 28 other countries is to have a coalition of the willing stepping forward to become, if you like, the guarantor of peace in the event of a deal being struck. What can a coalition of the willing achieve as a peacekeeping force?
So we have to wind ourselves back to understand what's meant by the word guarantee, because if there is a ceasefire as a minimum, or some sort of peace settlement with legs to it, then we'll understand the terms that have to be guaranteed. We want to be absolutely clear. There's a guarantee, which is as light as we'll show some presence in Ukraine, but if the war starts again, we're all off, and that is no deterrent to Russia and no help to Ukraine at all. If by guarantee we mean that this coalition, including US support, which will be important, is going to deter Russia, particularly Russia, breaking the ceasefire and the terms of the settlement, then we need to be clear that deter means you're there with the credible ability to fight, and that at the first shot you will not leave. You essentially become part of the fight. And we should also remember that when you make that sort of commitment, the day that's established, then Ukraine is forfeiting any thought of taking back territory by force with some sort of international presence in their country at the same time.
Could Russia actually proceed with caution if there is a coalition of the willing on terms of engagement that would challenge Russia?
No, look, the coalition of the willing to Russia is totally unacceptable. Why? Because Russia doesn't regard this war as a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is a war between Russia and NATO, which NATO countries are prepared to fight to the last Ukrainian. So the presence of troops from NATO countries is totally unacceptable. It's NATO again by stealth. No, it's not going to happen.
So are Ukraine comfortable with the idea that there will be a coalition of the willing with troops on the ground if they can get that part of the deal with President Putin?
Is the least what Ukraine hopes for. Ukraine hopes for that the sky over Ukraine will be closed, that there will be jets from Europeans and Americans protecting the sky in Ukraine. There will be troops, there will be weapons supplied to the Ukrainian army. And also about Russia's position, it is a negotiation. And Lavrov, he already said that Russia is not opposing having the US and the UK in a part of the coalition of the willing, but they want China included as well. So they are already giving up some of their positions.
But the thing is, Richard, we've come away with, some people, a sense of optimism. I mean, do we have in Europe the resources to actually put together an army that could play its role as a peacekeeping force?
So part of the answer to that question does come back to, well, what is the settlement and what are the terms of it and what's the obligations that arise from it? At its most extreme end, with US support, because the US has some capabilities nobody else has, and that doesn't infer US troops on the ground, then a combination of European air forces, navies and armies, plus all the capability that Ukraine has and its mobilized economy, and others, I think, from outside Europe, in combination, then that can make a telling difference to what happens in the sky, on the land and at sea.
Only if that coalition is willing to shoot and actually take on an aggressor.
So this is why I'm going to echo Alex's point, which is if the point of this coalition is to deter Russia from starting the war again in some fashion in the future, then it must turn up with the ability to fight and the will to fight, and the clear understanding must be not only that it can fight, but if the fight starts, it retains, in the jargon, escalation dominance. It can punch harder and faster and longer than Russia can manage. That's genuine deterrence. But how strange it will be if one of the Russia's core objectives in this war, stretching back now more than a decade, has been to keep NATO out of Ukraine. If the terms of the settlement mean that soldiers from NATO countries are in Ukraine and able to fight, that would seem to me.
So is it a sham? Do we know for certain, as you can be, that President Putin is not going to have any peacekeeping force with NATO troops?
Look, I don't think what. I'm not sure I understand what, for instance, the British government wants to achieve here. Because it's absolutely obvious that British troops are not prepared for any serious fighting against the Russians. The number, or the general will correct me if I'm wrong, but the number of British soldiers is about 80,000 people. They will all fit into Wembley Stadium. Do we really want British guys to die in Ukraine for President Zelensky and NATO? I don't.
Do you see we already presume that Russia will attack again?
And that presumption, you think, is that a belief held in Ukraine that this is a pause, a peacekeeping pause for Russia to regroup and then come again?
Of course, in my many trips to the front line, all of the Ukrainian soldiers told me the same thing, that after this war there will be another war, because the core goal of the Russian invasion is to destroy Ukrainian sovereignty, destroy Ukraine's independence, because Russia wants to control everything that is happening in Ukraine. But they want to have puppet government, and until then they won't stop.
How practical would that be, Richard, for actually this ceasefire just to be put in place? And everybody kind of knows Russia will be back for a second bite. It just seems a bit of a flight of fancy, isn't it?
So if there were to be a ceasefire, if it's not guaranteed by European and US forces, so it's up to the goodwill of both parties to whether the ceasefire holds, then I think there's an expectation that it will certainly be fragile and most likely shatter at the
But that's
point of
world
fusing.
war, isn't it? Because wouldn't you be looking at, we've heard this rather curious phrase that we'll have a peace that has a like-an Article 5 of NATO's treaty, that means if Ukraine is attacked by Russia, then we'll all get together and attack Russia. That's world war.
So I think this is the core question. I think what we're going to have to address is that this is a really pivotal moment for Europe and the US. They can either choose to do what has to be done in Ukraine, despite, frankly, Russian objections and the limitations of their armed forces.
And what is that? What needs to be done?
So that means delivering a force in combination that is capable of deterring Russia from restarting the war, and to echo the point on numbers, for a very long time. Because if you take a European army of, say, 100,000, and let's say 80,000 of them can deploy to somewhere like Ukraine, if you're going to be there for years, and you're going to be there for years, then you're going to divide that force by 3 or 4 or 5 times, depending on how long you want each commitment to be. So the numbers game gets really difficult. But we're going to come back to this question, which is you either settle a very difficult relationship between Europe and Russia by a good outcome in Ukraine, or you run the risk of, in some very difficult to define way, it spirals out of control in the future with much graver consequences. That's just where history has taken us.
Actually, I disagree with Svitlana. I don't think that Russia wants to destroy Ukraine's independence and all that. I think what Russia is offering now is something like the Soviet Union had with Finland. There is a very long border between Finland and the Soviet Union. The relations were very good, and Finland was neutral. The relations were very good. So what Russia is offering now is something like they had with Finland.
Okay, let's take that up. Could Ukraine be neutral now after this?
Ukraine was neutral all the time.
Could it be
before
again
Russia.
now with Russia on its doorstep again?
I think as part of the final agreement, yes, if there are security guarantees. Again, Ukraine won't agree to any peace deal with Russia if there are not security guarantees, because the most what Ukrainians are afraid of is the war coming back again. So I think as part, like a Ukrainian concession, it could be agreed that Ukraine will be neutral, but depending what we'll receive in exchange.
Lots of reports are circulating that actually all this talk of peace, no European leader really believes that they can get peace with Trump, with Putin, and that actually all this is an attempt to make Donald Trump realise Putin is not his best buddy, and actually they're a real threat. Do you think that's too cynical?
I think that any strategy works if Trump makes harsher sanctions on Russia. It took him a long time to understand that Putin is stalling with the negotiations, and Trump was even saying, okay, we're going to impose secondary tariffs, but eventually he didn't. It's already past 6 months, and Ukraine agreed to unconditional ceasefire back in March. So I think the strategy now is that to force Russia to negotiate.
Richard, I'll ask you this. as someone who's ready to take orders, or was ready to take orders from the governments of the day, European leaders all flock to pay homage to the court of President Trump, be nice to him, and he seems to listen and respond well and says the things they want to hear. Do you think, is there part of you who thinks we're dealing with a president who listens to the last person he has spoken to, and that if he gets in a room again with Trump, with President Putin, anything could happen?
So as a minute ago, I'm going to be interested in that sort of conversation, but I want to see what I'm actually asked to do. What are the terms of engagement, the rules of engagement? What capabilities must I have in order to deliver the outcomes that people are asking me to do? And that's where I'll have to drive a very hard bargain, because I think quite apart from the question about what Mr. Trump does, we are at a point where really Europe, because Europe knows that the US is going to do a lot less for its security for the rest of this century. So we may be at a low ebb, and we may not have asked for the particular circumstances.
It would take years for us to develop the strength and the resources and the capability as a European army, wouldn't it?
So
Putin can wait years as well, but he has no reason to.
So I think there's a transformative path. For example, it's in the UK Defence Review, and Europe has strengths, and particularly its air power and its sea power. Some of its land forces have work to do, but Ukraine is a mobilised society with a big set of armed forces in the field. So in combination, you could find a workable solution, and it would improve rapidly over time. But we're going to have to come back to the core question here, which is, if the US is not going to stand up for Europe in the way that we took advantage of for several decades, then Europe is going to have to find a way of establishing...
Do you think it's got the stomach to do that?
I don't think it has any choice, and I think this is about establishing a workable relationship with Russia for the rest of this century.
Alexander, what is... No? You disagree?
Look, the European leaders are pathetic. They can't be trusted. The best way to give Ukraine any guarantees is for the Americans to do this minerals deal and to have deep economic interests in Ukraine. I saw it with my own eyes in Saudi Arabia in 1990, where I was as a reporter covering the Desert Shield operation, which was before Desert Storm. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, there was a threat that he would go further to Saudi Arabia to occupy oil fields. This is when the Americans started building a shield in the desert. I saw with my own eyes tanks, Patriots, infantry, everything. I saw it. There was a shield. Why? Because Americans were economically, financially interested in protecting Saudi Arabia. Ukraine may have the same thing.
Svitlana, what do you say to that?
There were American companies when Russia invaded, and their factories and everything was bombed out. So I don't think that just having Americans digging the minerals in Ukraine is going to deter Russia from the future aggression.
What's going to allow President Putin to agree to a peace, do you think?
Well, he will not agree to peace on European terms or Ukrainian terms.
But what terms would
Russian
he agree
terms.
to? And those Russian terms, insist on land and a neutral government, a pro-Russian government, even in Ukraine?
No, I don't think pro-Russian government in Ukraine is possible at all, because obviously most Ukrainians hate Russia, not only Putin, but Russia in general. And I can't blame them. I can understand that totally. The economy is destroyed. A lot of people died. But therefore, for a pro-Russia friendly politician to appear in Ukraine would be very difficult, maybe even dangerous for his life. It's not going to happen.
How do you end the war? Very briefly.
You
give up land for Ukraine?
No, you choose not to appease the aggressor, and you actually force him to come to the table and agree to a peace deal.
Richard?
So I think this has now reached a point after 3.5 years of the very difficult phase of this war, that the only way from a Western perspective to bring it to a conclusion is for the West summoning will and strength that it has not found so far to establish terms that Russia may not like but can live with and can be made to live with, that at least settle the terms of relationship between Russia and the West. And some of that is military, some of that is economic. I think it's in everyone's interest to avoid at all costs this spiralling down to an even bigger war that nobody wants and no one can win.
Alexander Vassiliev, Richard Barrons, Svitlana Morenets, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Westminster Watch. Thanks again to my guests for joining me, and don't forget to follow TRT World on YouTube for more content. But for now, from me and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.